Welcome back to Hot Pot Talks. This is part of the panel series for Bitter Orientals Yellow Peril Unmasked. My name is Jen Sungshine, here with my dear friend and longtime creative partner David Ng, and together we are the co-artistic directors of Love Intersections, a media arts collective that produces intersectional and intergenerational film and artwork from underrepresented communities. We're also founding members of the Vancouver Artists Labor Union Co-Operative, also known as VALU CO-OP, which is the artist-run worker cooperative whose goal is to provide flexible living wage income to artists. Before we begin, we want to acknowledge that we are gathered here today from the unceded and ancestral territories of the Musqueam, Squamish, and Tsleil-Waututh nations. Part of our work as labor activists and queer artists on unceded territories means working in solidarity with ongoing Indigenous struggles for sovereignty, decolonization, reparations, and land back. Hot Pot Talks emerged during the pandemic from our collaboration with the Lim Association in Chinatown, historically a neighborhood of Chinese railroad laborers who were brought to settle Indigenous territories as part of the ongoing colonial project.
So why Hot Pot Talks? As Jen mentioned, we're members of the Vancouver Artists Labor Union Cooperative, VALU Co-op, and we have a studio in the Lim Association building. And when we moved into that studio, we had long conversations about the role that artists have played in Chinatown, and some of it not good, like towards gentrification. And so we were very intentional when we moved into that space to build a relationship with the Lim Association. And so over the past 2 years, we've been digitizing the archives with the Lim Association, building them a website, which is actually launched just last week, limassociation.ca. And this ongoing collaboration, we hope to continue. Hot Pot Talks really grew out of that collaboration. And during the pandemic, when we weren't able to meet in person and have the art shows that we wanted to do with the association, we started Hot Pot Talks out of this, out of an intention of wanting to connect with community and the themes of nourishment, warmth, thinking about Chinatowns as nourishment, thinking about the ceremony of hot pot, sharing food, the communal nature of hot pot, and the many different types of hot pot in many different types of, in many versions of hot pot all over Asia and all around the world, and also thinking about comfort food, variety, thinking about the different textures in hot pot, and thinking about these textures as a metaphor for community dialogue. And I wanted to highlight that today because our guest in particular, a lot of her work really resonates with some of these themes of Hot Pot Talks. And so over the past 2 years, we've been collaborating with the elders at the Lim Association. And so Bitter Orientals Yellow Peril Unmasked grew out of this collaboration. And we're excited to continue to talk about some of those themes. Oh, one more thing.
I was like,
Lots of
wait,
lots
it's
of
not
things
my cue
today.
yet.
You may have noticed in our intro video, we had all of these. You may have noticed these special red envelopes. We designed these defund the police red envelopes that are on sale right now. The link is being dropped in the chat, and proceeds will go to the work of Defund 604.
Great. Thanks, David. Before we begin, we want to acknowledge that this episode with Jane Wong is co-sponsored by Richmond Art Gallery and hashtag Richmond Has Heart. We also want to thank Canadian Heritage, Canada Council for the Arts, and BC Arts Council. And finally, our incredible team, Ava and Cameron, in the back end who help make Hot Pot Talks a reality. So without further ado, I'm just so excited to introduce our beloved guest today. Jane Wong was raised in a Chinese American takeout restaurant. She is the author of How to Not Be Afraid of Everything and Overpour. Her memoir, Meet Me Tonight in Atlantic City, is forthcoming from Tin House in 2023. She is an associate professor at Western Washington University, where she teaches poetry and Asian American literature. And Jane Wong is currently featured in the Richmond Art Gallery's exhibit Nourish and on now until April 3rd of this year. Welcome, Jane, to the Hot Pot table.
Hi, Jane.
I am so excited to be here with David and Jen. You have no idea. You both are just like, we had like a pre-conversation, like almost like a pre-dinner before dinner, if you know what I mean.
It's the amuse-bouche.
Right, exactly. And we chatted, I don't know how long ago, maybe a couple months ago, and it felt like I was already, like, I don't know, I already known you for years, so it was so lovely. So I'm so excited to be back here, and I both brought you some gummies. Strawberry for you. So
my favorite. How did you know?
Super juicy.
Jane, I wonder, maybe we could kick off because I kind of teased this in the intro. The title of the exhibit at the Richmond Art Gallery, your work in it, your work in your book, which is incredible, by the way. I'm only halfway through. But can you tell me about, maybe we can start with that, your work in the show and your practice and connection to the theme of Nourish.
Oh yeah, I love that. I love the title Nourish because it's not, it's that term itself is so expansive. Like it's not just about, I don't know, like fueling yourself to like eat to just, go about your day, but it's about comfort. And I think it's about something that you keep returning to over and over again that nourishes you. And yeah, so I mean, nourishment for me I just actually made juk yesterday because I just needed it. Like I just needed to make juk and, just waiting for it to kind of coagulate. There's something about that kind of waiting process that just made me so comforted, and that to me is so nourishing. But nourishment is also about community and, again, being around that hot pot table, being around, my family members, my friends, that to me is always tied to nourishment. And yeah, it just, I grew up in a restaurant. I feel like I can't not think about nourishment and just kind of the ways in which I was kind of brought up to kind of really believe food is kind of that means of articulating love and care. And understanding when sometimes it doesn't feel like there's understanding. To be honest, it's kind of also a kind of way of saying like I want to make peace of sorts.
Yes.
Especially when my family's complicated. So that was like the one place that felt like, we could stay like for an hour and at least be nourished together, and we can fight again if we want to. But so yeah, that word means a lot to me in so many ways, but it always comes down to connection, I think, and relationships.
Yeah. No, I resonate with that so much. So I got COVID last week.
Oh my gosh!
And thankfully my symptoms were very, 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 very mild. Thank you, vaccinations.
Yes.
But I was the first thing that I wanted was juk. And I don't know if there's in Western science if there's any, but that's what I wanted, like just that sort of comfort of it. And when you're describing the cooking of it, um, I wonder. So maybe if I can get nerdy for a moment, because I'm thinking about. Jen and I have been thinking about food practices in terms of thinking about diaspora, thinking about like our own identity, and we've been thinking about. I'm gonna quote. I forget the name of the authors, but it's this theme of mimesis. So we recently put together this article around. What the implications of doing exactly this, like the cultural practices of folks in the diaspora. And this article talks about like this theme of mimesis, about how it actually has transformative power. I'm wondering about your own practices of food. How do you employ food in your arts practice?
Oh my gosh. And also like I'm glad you didn't have a intense COVID. I will say, just sending hearts that way. And
Thank you.
yeah, joke whenever. I feel like that's like the medicinal soup of choice. I distinctly remember in high school, I had like a really bad period, so much so that I actually fainted on my way to try to go to the bathroom in the hallway, and it just like knocked me out. And my mom, I guess, got called in and was like, you got to pick up your daughter at school because she fainted. And my mom just came with juk. Like, she just was like, I'll just take her and feed her this soup and she'll be fine. So it's like the juk was like always, that kind of medicinal care. I feel like my relationship with food and cooking and recipes and I don't know, kind of nourishment in that way has always been a little complicated, because I think growing up as a restaurant baby, especially as someone who's first generation to go to even finish high school, like go to college, my mom and dad were always kicking me out of the kitchen, and so I never actually learned to cook my whole life, and so I was always cared for, cooked for, and that's so generous to me to kind of for me that like the people are always taking care of me this way. But it took until COVID, during the pandemic, to actually learn how to cook for myself, and I realized that learning to cook has been healing. Like I couldn't write a single thing during the pandemic, the early days of the pandemic. I was actually completely, for the first time in my entire life, frozen in my words. Like I couldn't.
Wow.
Language has always been something that I guess, it was always within me. Like I could always try to say how I felt through a metaphor or through an image or one word. I love the sounds of words, but nothing. And so I cooked, like for real, cooked for the first time in my entire life.
Wow.
And the first dish I made was juk. And I immediately started cooking, Toy Sunny's comfort foods. That was like my first thing. And, being on the phone with my mom while doing that was really hard, because like she was like, like, what are you doing? Like, did you stir it? And I was like, no, I didn't stir it. She was like, good. She knew I was going to do what I shouldn't have done. So anyway, I think I lost track of the question, because I feel like I went down some other kind of like weird.
That's the whole point of
avenue.
Hot Pot Talks. It's like we were meant to go deep dives in
But
different directions.
I'm all for the nerdiness, so please, I am a huge nerd. So
Well, I
appreciate
can't
that, David.
stop thinking about that video that's in Nourish in the exhibit. Actually, if I may share, and we can talk about this as well, kind of the centerpiece. But I think this one in particular, it's a video of you, and we were so in awe. And actually, David, you couldn't come with this group with us because you had COVID. So otherwise, you would have seen this. So a group of our practicum students came, and I brought them. I was a single mom, brought them to Richmond. We took the transit. I was like, okay, I'm ready to go. And we were floored by this footage of you where you're not even breaking like eye contact, where you're reciting, but you're not even looking down at what you're doing, because you're so like, it's like it's like muscle memory. It's so,
Yes.
and you're just operating, so fluidly and so practice, and you're just like doing, and it was just an incredibly moving scene. I would be curious to hear more from you. Like, how did you film this, and what were your thoughts that was going on in your head as you're reciting your words?
Yeah, thank you for that, Jen. That particular piece in Nourish, sorry, my ears have like different sized like holes. That sounds, anyway, they keep falling out of my ear. Anyway, yeah, back to what I was saying before the headphone situation. That piece in particular is really close to my heart because it's a very, very long poem. Let's see, I have my book in front of me. It is really dense. It's called The Long Labors, and if you look at it in the
Yeah.
book version, to me it looks like a giant block of tofu, or like pressing
Yeah.
tofu, just like dense.
Yeah.
And it's about labor. It's about, in particular, matrilineal labor and growing up in a restaurant, but also like the labor of being a mother. And my mom is a postal worker and she works night shifts. And it also speaks to my labor as a professor and my complex feelings about
Yeah.
upward mobility, which, that could be a whole other thing. But it's a dense poem. And what I wanted to do actually was and maybe it's not fully apparent in the video, but I actually end up cutting some of those words, some of those lines in the poem into rice paper. And then I have a dumpling mix, which was pork and chive. And I fold the rice paper words inside the dumpling mix, and it starts to disintegrate as rice paper does. And then I started reading the poem while making the dumplings. And so ultimately, I pretty much eat my own poem, or kind of fold it that way. But also, it is muscle memory, and I was kind of shocked by that. I'm not a multitasker whatsoever. And, to go back to that childhood act of, folding wontons, folding dumplings with my mom at the restaurant, that was like my favorite chore, actually, that I was assigned to, felt like so powerful to me, because the poem itself, of course, speaks to labor, but it bothered me that like I wasn't actually like doing the labor that I grew up doing. And so, to fold it, to actually replicate that process. And it's, for me, very matrilineal. Like, it was even not at the restaurant. If we are making dumplings at home, it was always my mom and my grandmother. Like, it was, I don't know why, it was just like this thing that, we just sat down and did while basically gossiping, speaking trash, basically talking trash on people while making dumplings. And so, I didn't know that I would have muscle memories. It just happened. And I think that that's part of the, I guess that it's like living within my body, I think, the way I grew up in a restaurant. And I feel really proud of that, especially in a job right now that feels so divorced from it. It's so far away, being in the academy, which is pretty oppressive and really frustrating, I think, when a lot of my colleagues don't come from a similar kind of working class, low income background. So it's all the feels. But yeah, I can fold without without looking at it.
It's incredible.
They were a little messy, but they didn't explode or anything. So
Yeah, that's hilarious.
Maybe we can go back to this, because I was very moved by this exhibit, because the first thing you enter is the centerpiece, which, of course, I think like many BIPOCs, we gravitate to the round table. And we gravitate towards the kitchen, or the space that holds the food. So I'm curious about, well, there's also this, of course, with the pile rice. And I did hear from Kathy, was gracious enough to give us a tiny tour of the exhibit. But I'm curious if you can start from the top in terms of how you were able to work with the curator to produce and to map this out.
Yeah, so the curator, Nan, was super like she made a lot of room for me to kind of do what I wanted to do. The table piece was actually originally a piece that came from the Fry Art Gallery back in 2019. And so I knew that she was interested in recreating it, but with a new energy behind it, which was actually the chandelier was originally plastic thank you bags, as you would for a takeout restaurant, filled with flowers and oranges. And here we have the soup spoons, which kind of dangle, which for me creates a sense of sound. Like I hear them clinking.
Yes.
And they have these great shadows. And I don't know if you can see the thread that they're kind of, for those of you who go to the show, you'll see the thread that they're dangling on. It reminds me of that one root vegetable my mom called the spider.
Yes.
And I love that. And then you can see the staples in the ceiling. It reminds me of flies and like me snacking flies at the restaurant. So tiny details like that, like was so fun to kind of reimagine, like bring new life into this piece that was shown in 2019. And this piece in particular is the title, I guess the poem that ends the book, and it's called After Preparing the Altar, the Ghosts Feast Feverishly. And I really wanted it to be a poem that feels like you gather around the table together, that you also, like you said, like BIPOCs like gather in the kitchen, like no matter if there's like, things set out in the living room, right? Everybody's packed like sardines in the kitchen, just like we're all just there hanging out. Because it's a cozy, and it's literally the warmest space. Like it's so cozy. And I wanted this table to gleam. Like I wanted it to be almost like a chocolate coin, like something you would gravitate towards. And the poem lives inside of the bowls, and you kind of have to walk around the table to read it. And it has no beginning and end. And I think for me as a poet, obviously on the page, it's it's a little hard to just stay on the page. It's this sculpture of sorts, or this installation, allows me to push the original poem off the page, away from a beginning and end, away from line breaks even, and just like reimagine it. And there are empty bowls in here too, to try to kind of create that juxtaposition between gluttony and hunger, and the history that my family comes from during the Great Leap Forward. So that to me was such a powerful. Oh yeah, I love that one.
Love this one.
Not guarded, not
it's one of my favorites. Yeah.
That's actually one of my favorite lines.
Oh, I love that.
It's just straight up true.
Yeah.
I mean, I just love garlic. So, and it's just like, well, of course, that just idea of knotted garlic, just like, that we're all kind of connected that way. This piece means a lot to me. And then the pillows, that's a new piece for the Richmond Art Gallery show. The pillowcases are actually rice bags, like rice bag pillows, which I totally had a little pillow fight before the show opens. Just with myself, I guess, pandemic times, but I tossed them around. It was really fun. These are actually donated from local restaurants in Richmond, and as well as my mom. And I really love that. My mom gave me 2 bags. And then the rest are coming from restaurants around Richmond. So I just really love that. And they're just full of like pillow stuffing. And when I was a kid growing up in a restaurant, because being in the restaurant is also really, really long hours. Like the restaurant doesn't really close up until midnight, maybe after midnight. And for a kid, I would fall asleep on rice bags. That was like my nap place. And so I really wanted to think about how heavy those rice bags were, how heavy labor is, and those long hours, and how much how hard my mom worked at the restaurant and also at the post office, and kind of give it some light, give it some air. I wanted to kind of loosen that weight, and so that's why it's pillowcases. In addition to me napping there, I wanted to give it that. Give her a little bit of a rest or break. So I was thinking about that when I was.
Well, there's that contrast with the pillow. It's like fluffy and light and airy, and that's like what you look for in a pillow versus the rice that is just in actuality so heavy, and you're like dragging it around.
Totally.
I have a question that's coming up. I'm kind of going back to the institution. I'm just thinking.
Yes. Are you ready? You've been dying to have this conversation, David, because David's doing his PhD. So he's.
Well, and I'm doing a research creation PhD, right? And so, and Jen and I, part of we make films, and we're expanding into other forms, but what I've been really pushing, and this is part of what my interest is, like a lot of our focus and our process and our practice is actually a social practice, like cultivating
Mm-hmm.
relationships that sometimes there's an output of a film, but the cultural production is in the relationship. And so now that I'm going through, and the reason why I'm thinking about this is because a lot of what you're thinking about, Jane, with your poem and how you've now created it into the table and the sort of the spaces with the empty bowls and things like that. And I think about like sort of how when I've been trying to think through these things in my dissertation for Love Intersections, how sort of this where we bump up against in terms of like what is knowledge production, right?
Yeah.
How does a social practice, a weird social practice like Jen and ours, like mine, is not like these types of big
It's so
performance.
nebulous and abstract and hard to pin down.
And so I guess when I was talking to Jen about this earlier, it's like I wondered if, and this is I'm not a writer, and I'm not really in the literary world, but I wonder if like you've bumped up against that. I mean, in my own sort of ignorance, I assume that like maybe does literature fall under like, is it more regarded differently than other art forms, or how have you bumped up against some of this crap that the institution says that this is knowledge and this isn't, and
Mm-hmm.
this is a dissertation, this isn't.
Mm-hmm.
Oh my gosh, yes. And I think that that's always going to be something that will continually make me rageful and just
Hmm.
frustrated. And it's like, like I just want, like at the end of the day, I'm just like, I just want your money to
Yeah.
just make some things happen that I don't think I could make happen without it, which I hate that too. And so even like, how can I do that? How can I like untether myself also from the institution? I think about that question all the time too. That would take a lot of collective leaving, I suppose, as well. But yeah, came up against this, throughout my entire, I think, career as a writer. And I don't even, it's even weird to use even that word attached to it, because if I return back to myself, my baby Jane self, I was just a creator. Like I just made things. I made art. I wrote poems. I drew things, and there wasn't anything that was necessarily, I don't know, like I didn't want to be a writer in the sense of like being published or be a professor even. Of course, there's pressure, I think, as first
Yeah.
gen, that I always felt that. But yeah, like especially the literary institutions can be, there's so much gatekeeping. And I will never forget too, like when you know, there's this big poetry award called the Ruth Lilly, and you win a pretty big chunk of money if you do get it. And there's only 4 poets that get this prize, and there's always a finalist list of like I think 12 to 15 poets. And I was on the finalist a few times, but one of my not friends, a white person basically said, only one Asian can win, Jane. And I was up against my best friend,
Wow.
Hannah Stenghe Park, at the time, who was also finalist. And he said to me, and Hannah is a better poet, so you're going, like, she's going to get it and you won't. And I think it was so horrible to hear
Oh,
someone say that, just kind of also to pit us against each other.
Yes. Yeah, it's
yeah.
Was
classic.
horrible and classic, and he was part of the institution in the sense of like, the horrible thing is it was true. Like,
That's what
and
I
he
was.
knew
Yeah.
it,
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
he was right. And Hannah won, and
Mm.
there was only one Asian that won. And so
Yeah.
it's one of those things where like I think the institution just gets replicated, I think, constantly over and over again by the next generation. And there needs to be some deep disruption. And I think that that's happening, certainly led by BIPOC folks,
Yes.
certainly in in terms of the literary world. But yeah, there's I feel constantly up against all of this. And even being a creative writing professor, I find it really difficult to try to get my students to know, like, okay, this is homework, like you're writing a poem, but this is not, this is not homework. Like I need you to realize that the poems that we're writing in this course, right, under this institution, actually can move outside of it and make change and create action, and to connect with local communities, and people in their families, and share it with their families. I feel like that's ultimately something that I keep thinking about. And I still have a dream of leaving the institution. Like I don't have the answer of how to get out yet. I'm in it. I refuse to replicate it. I think I constantly go to department meetings and set things on fire, but that's like, and they know me by now, to do that. And I certainly have colleagues that expected me to be maybe polite or silent, especially
the model minority.
Oh, totally, 100%. And also as junior faculty, and I was like, oh, you also
don't even know.
You also chose a Jersey girl. You have no idea what you're in for.
I'm curious. So you say you're a Jersey girl. Can you tell us a little bit about where you grew up and what your childhood was like, outside of the restaurant?
Oh my gosh. Yeah. So I am through and through a Jersey girl, Jersey Shore girl in particular, and not like there's like there may be some nice parts of the Jersey Shore, but I'm from a part that just is a little goopy. I don't know how to describe it. It's not. I grew up in a strip mall, and I knew all of the people who ran all of the stores in that strip mall very closely. They were my closest friends, actually. The shop owners, the pizzeria, the laundromat, the candy store, the beauty salon. Like I just like adored adults, and so I just hung out with them most of the time, and they were quite probably annoyed that a small child was just always just sitting there staring at them and being like, talk to me. But yeah, so Jersey to me is like people just kind of randomly start talking to you at all times. So my mom is at the grocery store and she'll just be like, avocados. And the person was like, avocados. And they'll just start talking and suddenly become best friends. But also, like, I feel like in Jersey, people don't take shit. And so I feel like, my mom is very, very blunt. It's been so different, I think, living out here, I suppose. But yeah, I grew up, I grew up in my grandparents', they had like a little split level, almost like a half house. And then I lived because I was there with all my aunts and uncles. And so there were like 4 uncles in that house. And my mom, my dad were right in the attic. And I distinctly remember hearing squirrels just like running across the beams. Like it was, for me as a child, such a magical place to grow up.
Yeah.
The restaurant, the squirrels, all these like shop owners. I felt like I had a mansion because I just lived in all these shops. It was so fun, except for the liquor store. That was like the one I pressed my
You're not allowed to get in
the glass. They're like, they won't let me in. I'm like, what? Come on. Like,
the forbidden castle. It's the forbidden.
It really was forbidden. I didn't know why. Like, I was like, are you kidding me? Like, I was just like, because usually I would bring, Chinese food to give the shop owners. There was a lot of like community exchange. Like, we just like gave each other like a slice of pizza. Here's some chicken broccoli. Here's like a lip balm. Here's, this. And so the liquor store is the only place I would bring them something, and they just wouldn't let me in. And so I just
that's so
perplexed
funny
by it. So that's just I just grew up as a weird kid, and the public library was pretty much across the street. So my mom would just drop me off there for like 6 hours for free babysitting. That was it. I mean, I really do think that growing up that way did make me even more of an artist, even more of a writer, because I was surrounded by so many sensory sounds and people, conversations, stories. Like it was constant. Like I never needed to watch television. Like it was all around me. There were like characters and strange things happening. And, like when it would snow a lot in Jersey, the snowplow would come by in the parking lot and push the snow all up against the lampposts. And for me, that was like going to Alaska. I would just like, take a broom and just like climb up the giant, like, snow
Scaling
peak,
a mountain.
scaling a mountain and sit there and just be like, I think I see a polar bear. And I'm sure there's just random people like actually trying to like do errands and stuff, just going in and out under like, oh, there's that little child again, with her little brother, just roaming. And people still recognize me actually in my hometown. And they'll be like, oh my gosh, little Jane. I'm just like, I'm all grown up. I'm almost 40.
Fascinating. My partner and I talk about this all the time. Like I'm in my mid 30s and my partner's mid 40s, I want to say. And we often talk about how we've never really grown up and that we still remain this childlike state, because we've never had to. I think school does a lot of the work where it like strips your creativity and like, extracts it from you. But it never really got to us. Because even just what you're saying, like being a weird kid, I was such a weird kid too. I was like the only child raised by Buddhist hippies, but it was just me and my dad because my mom was still in Taiwan making money. And I was this weird kid that didn't really speak English at first. So I was just in the forest constantly, very Pacific Northwest mountain experience, and was like hang out by myself, quite dangerously actually, now that I think about it at like 8 years old, in the ravine, playing by myself. And again, these public spaces like malls, strip malls, public libraries were such potent spaces of gathering because like you said, it's where our imagination that's where I could find all of these stories. That's where I could like put all of these stories into practice, and I would just like my imagination would run wild, and then somewhere along the way you just start to kind of, I guess, make yourself a little bit more little, and you just become smaller and smaller as the world becomes bigger, But it just reminded me, because I really wanted to ask, like, when was the moment you wanted to be a writer, and whether that was a very definitive moment or not. But as I was I remember to ask you this question, I was like, oh my God, I had a moment in grade 6 where I had like all of these, I had finally found a group of friends. And it was like, and the reason why was because I wrote fan fiction about my classmates. And so I handed my fan fiction around to my friends and to pass around the school for my class, and everyone had like these two, had a crush on each other. They kissed behind the balconies here. Like it was this whole kind of world building that involved these characters that were, my classmates. And it was just really popular. And that's how I got friends, was because I wrote them into fan fiction.
Wow.
And I just remember, this is not something I've never told this before. I think, David, I told you one time, but wasn't in detail. Anyway.
Oh my gosh. Right? I feel like that is so amazing. I love that you also made your made your friends into your friends by
writing.
spreading also some like not necessarily like it can't be gossip because you made it up. Also,
Yeah.
Gossip is maybe
It
made
is
up.
gossip.
That's true. That's actually true. It was almost kind of like you're making like tarot cards for them. Like it's like this will happen. And I was like, oh, I love that idea. Yeah, no, I think that, and I also love you playing by the stream and just kind of just all the kind of, I don't know, that space we have to play as children. And I think our baby selves, all three of us would have had so much fun. I always try to always go back to baby Jane and what she wants to do. I think that the moment, it wasn't necessarily a single moment, but certainly when I went to the public library across the street, and my mom would leave me there for many hours, I would fall in love with these books and these characters. Yeah. But like there weren't any characters that really reflected my experience and didn't, look like me, didn't, and I mean, I grew up in the 80s and I feel like very much so, even at a young age, I kind of was frustrated and was like, I wish I could do that, but I could do that like not necessarily better, but kind of. I was
But kind of better.
I was kind of a little bit like, what? Like, this was a terrible sentence, or like, oh, this ending is horrible. And so I just, and I wanted so badly, I think, for my voice to be heard, because in school I never talked. I didn't have any friends at school. Like I mentioned, I mostly tried to be friends with adults. Like I just was that weirdo. And so I actually would rewrite some of these stories and slip them into the library books. And so I'm sure that the librarian was just pulling them out and whatnot. But I think that already it was early on that I knew that I was like really wanting to just like have myself in the story, see a protagonist that was me. And so I think it was very early. But Jen, you made me remember too that I actually tried that method. I don't know. I was like, I tried that method. I was like, I thought I could make friends by also writing cool stories. And so I would just try to like slip them and like hand them to people, and it didn't work. I just got in trouble for passing notes. So my teacher caught me and was like, "You're passing notes," and I was like, "Oh no!" My really terrible like Goosebumps inspired.
Oh
like,
my God,
terrible.
Goosebumps.
So bad. And no one was into it, but that's okay. I tried to, but too bad.
Jane, I wanted to ask you, when I was reading your book, and I noticed, I mean, and it's also I think in the exhibit write-up as well, when I saw on the Richmond Art Gallery, you touch on a lot of family trauma as a intergenerational trauma. And I'm specifically thinking about, like you mentioned, I think you mentioned the Great Leap Forward as well. And I was taken aback because my family's experience of that is very much erased in this, like deliberately, like unspoken about. There's a couple stories that have been shared with me, but they're far and few between. So I guess I'm curious, because I'm thinking Jen and I are also going through this. In September, Jen and I we went on a retreat to really sort of think through what were we wanting to think through around these themes of migration, intergenerational trauma, our own identities, and so
without being the like trope. Sorry to cut you off, David, but without being the trope of diasporic artists, and re-romanticizing, reorientalizing ourselves, all of those tropes.
Yeah, and I guess what I was thinking about was, when I was reading your work and thinking about my own family history, was how I get the sense that, and this is just not just from my family. I'm sure there's many other diasporic families that have done this, but there's been the earlier generations did this to protect us in some way.
Yeah.
And so what part of those stories that are obviously intergenerational trauma that are in my body, how much of it, or how do I think it through in my arts practice? And so I don't know. I don't know what the question is that I have, but that was some of the things that came up when I was reading your work, and I was curious, how does that come up for you when you put those stories onto a page, because it is your own story. It becomes your story as well.
Yeah. Thank you for sharing that, David. That's a pretty, I would say, pretty common experience from a lot of, at least, Chinese American friends of mine who try to basically reconcile the fact that no one talks about this, but knowing that it happens, and what do you do with that kind of, I guess, loud silence, if you think of it that way.
Yeah.
And that was my case too. I don't really my family doesn't talk about the Great Leap Forward. There's no direct stories about it. It's, my family uses the kind of term that is kind of like disappeared, like people disappeared, family members disappeared, my sisters disappeared, my parents disappeared. And it's like, okay, like when I was in college and I learned about it in my Chinese politics class, which if I wasn't in that class, I don't know when or how I would have found that out, which is complicated, certainly. I just put two and two together, and I was like, okay, this happens. And
Yeah.
I don't ever, I never wanted to ask for stories. I didn't ask my grandfather about any of this because it was so painful. Like
Yeah.
he's protecting me, like my family's protecting me, but I'm protecting him too by like not wanting to stir this up, this awful sludge of history, and even though it's real and it's there and it's, I learned about the Great Leap Forward in college. This was probably 2003 or 2004 or something like that. And it took me however long to finally speak to it in this book, which I finished, I think, in 2019, maybe. And it was hard. It was really hard to kind of really struggle with, like, what is research? Like, what happens when the archive is a ghost? And what happens when you don't want to stir up those feelings for your family? Because why would you? Like, I want to respect their silence as much as I want to know. And so I started writing these poems to my ancestors. So I think poetry art allows me a lot of freedom to just express all these messy feelings around it. There's one poem in my book, From When You Die, which is a set of, poems written as letters. And it begins like, I went to the library to find you. I stained a book about Maoist-era politics with the tomato soup I had microwaved earlier. And just like the failure of that opening few lines, it's like, I tried to find out about the Great Leap Forward while eating like a can of tomato soup. How easy it was for me to just pick up a can of like soup, heat it up and eat it while it was just to admit like the huge crevasse between their experience and mine, and the failure of me failing to find what I needed to find. And, I think that poem was so hard, but I also am so grateful that I did it because it taught me about longing. It taught me about like what I long for in terms of that intergenerational like trauma and history, and trying to find those answers, which never get answered, but I'm okay with that. It's more about the reaching. It's more about the longing for it than it is finding what you want to find. But, and I think too, admitting to that failure, admitting to the uncomfortable feelings of like, was it even mean for me to hold that history however many years later, between that hunger and that gluttony that I grew up in, most of that poem and, most of this book is me trying to basically hold hold the gummy or hold the egg that I have in front of me and put it back. Like, can I literally throw it back into time and they can just grab it from the sky and just eat it? Like, if I could just feed them in the past, like, could I do that? And I think poetry is my weird way of like, I guess like an altar space. Like, I want to transmit that, let them know that I'm thinking about them, and that's my only way I can do it. My only sadness deeply is that I am not fluent enough to say this and read my poems in Toisanese. I can't write in Chinese, and that's like my maybe one thing. I'm like, it has to be in English, like like the colonizers' language. No, so I don't know. Like, I just there's that. But I will say that I think I'm so grateful I did it, because it scared me for so long to write through it. And, as, Jen was mentioning too, like, not to try to replicate also like the idea of like, I will just say I got an email once from someone in Bellingham, where I live. And this person was like, can you please read at a reading a starvation poem? And I was like, what? And it's just the idea of like, trauma porn, or just this
that's weird.
And it really bothers me that, like, who is this book for too? And I think about that all the time. Like, intergenerational trauma is not some weird trophy or some sort of like circus act that I get to like put on to talk about starvation. Like, it bothered me so much.
This might actually be. We have lots of good questions. Maybe we can. this question. I recently had a discussion with someone who didn't understand the feelings of rage in relation to intergenerational trauma of people of color. How do we approach these conversations in a safe way?
Oh my gosh.
Mm.
Yeah, I mean, I navigate this often, and David and I as well together because we have worked in social justice for more than a decade. It's coming up to two, I think. And the rage is not just in our shared DNA, but it's also this collective rage of what's going on in the world. The world is falling apart. There's these external forces that are beyond our control. And so navigating that rage while remaining a creative sense of optimism in order to create can also feel like I'm just mass producing something for someone to be consumed. There's all sorts of like intimate layers that we're often kind of working with and kind of swimming against, and it's very difficult to especially because there's also people place, oh, you're really authentic, or you're really authentic in how you express your culture and your hybridity of like two cultures or more cultures together. And it feels it's gross when people objectify you and your artwork in that way, right? And I think, that's similar to the person that wanted you to read the starvation poem. And so I'm not sure where I'm necessarily going with this, but it's something that we contend with all the time. But I remain hopeful despite my rage. This is the crazy part, is that I still believe that the world is going to get better despite all signs otherwise. So I don't know where this comes from, and I can't help but think that is the influence of my ancestors and how they survived and how they were resilient. If they can do it, then certainly I can. I think I take on the like energetic, the residual kind of teachings and medicines and wisdom from my ancestors.
Yeah, your ghosts have your back.
My ghosts, yes. I often think that there have been scary moments or tricky or complicated moments or like moments where I feel implicated and weird. But somehow I felt like I'm going to make it, and that there was even scary moments where I was like, ooh, that was very dangerous, but I somehow made it out. Lots of close calls where I think someone must have been watching out for me. Yeah.
Jane, I want to ask what you're working on next. I hear you have a memoir coming out.
Yes, which terrifies me. And I will say my memoir also has a lot of rage in it, as my book does too. And I guess to answer both those questions in a kind of as best I can, I was thinking about rage and anger and how in many ways like BIPOC communities are so full of rage, and then like a lot of white people are like, what are you so angry about? And just that very question I get asked, like, why are you so angry? Like my friends and I, Michelle, we text each other these really terrible things that happen to us, and like, I'm okay, I'm supposed to be angry, right? And we'd have to text each other back like, yeah, that's messed up. But the fact that we even have to do that as like to validate our anger, I think stems from this feeling of like, we're not supposed to be angry. And that bothers me. I think this idea of like, we're not supposed to be full of rage. So I want to make sure that like we validate the rage is real. It's boiling literally in the hot pot, like, like, and so, and I think too, that for me, being angry and being rageful is more powerful in community than it is being alone. I feel like I can be a rage monster myself, in my little corner space somewhere. But like when I'm angry together, like stuff can get done. Like you were saying, Jen, like the hope that the change can happen. And that to me feels exciting. Like poetry to me feels like, sometimes it feels so lonely, but it's not. Like there is actually a lot of community around it. And I think too, like my memoir, I really hope, and my biggest thing, because I know that intergenerational like trauma, Asian American memoirs, like sad stories sell.
Yes.
And that also troubles me.
Yeah.
And I really want this memoir, even though, yes, you know, there is intergenerational trauma in it. Yes, like my father left my family and he gambled away the restaurant. Yes, all these things happened. I hope it's absolutely ridiculous and funny and makes you laugh, like, and cry. Like, you know, I really hope, you know, that there's, you know, like for instance, like I grew up, my mom went to illegal dentists in New York City's Chinatown because, you know, couldn't afford healthcare. You know, I call that essay Root Canal Street. And I hope it's funny when you think like, oh, you know, Canal Street, Root Canal. And that most of the essay is us trying to find the secret grandma that tries to take us to the illegal dentist. And it's just like almost this kind of like game to see which grandma was it? Like, did she tip her hat? And we actually had to pay her
My
in
God,
like
that's amazing.
pastries. We had to give her like her favorite dantat, like to get her to bribe her to. Anyway, so I
Wow.
hope
Yeah,
that the essays are really funny, and I hope that they're goofy and that they represent like kind of like a bad immigrant. Like I'm not interested in being the model minority. Like you know, I was a thief. I also literally like got caught stealing at Lord and Taylor. Like it talks about me just basically being like a kid that always was, you know, a weirdo. I'm not interested in a memoir that is going to be that kind of, I guess, the story of what they want to hear. And I'm just trying to be as true to my ridiculous upbringing and painful, but also I want there to be joy. I want there to be beauty in that. And I think the memoir really circles around my mother as that, you know, speaking of our, you know, ancestors surviving, like my mom, you really taught me to fight and survive in so many different avenues of my life. And she's really the true beating heart of the memoir. You know, if there was wongmom.com advice column, like she would just, you know, be bursting with just kind of love and kind of advice. And she's such an extrovert. And it's so funny because of the model minority stereotype, the stereotype of like the silent Asian. People are always shocked when they meet her because she's immediately like, you know, trying to like hug you and like get your number, you know.
That's amazing. I want to meet your mom.
Yeah, me too.
Oh my gosh, she would love to meet you both. Trust me, and she just would adore you both. Trust me, just based on personality, she would just be like, she literally scoop you up, and you know, scoop you both into her closet, and you'd all try on some clothes or something. She's just that type of person. She likes to play dress up all the time.
Oh,
That's amazing. I'm curious, Jane, so you started cooking during the pandemic. What did you, so juk, you mentioned juk.
Yes.
What else did you make?
Oh, you know, I actually started to fry tofu, which I know sounds kind of boring,
yum.
but I was really obsessed with getting it to a certain consistency. And it turns out you just have to, after you press it, just like the poem, like press the tofu poem, you basically dredge it in rice flour and like seasoning. And so the rice flour makes it really crispy when I fry it. So that was like one thing that I was like really into. I also, so yeah, I cooked some like, you know, some other, you know, Cantonese Toisanese dishes. Like there's that one, I don't know what it's called. It's like that eggplant dish that has kind of beef in it and you eat it over. It's almost like a stew. Very comforting for me.
Yeah.
But, you know, because I grew up in Jersey, I am obsessed with pizza and I'm kind of a pizza snob. I'm terrible, but like here on the West Coast,
this is not pizza.
It's not pizza.
It's not pizza here.
No. And, you know, I grew up right next door to a pizzeria. Like, you know, pizza is a big part of my life. I'm a huge cheese fan. I love cheese.
Love cheese.
And so I started making pizza.
Nice.
So I got a stone and a peel and everything. And I'm a little pizzolo, just like tossing my pizzas in there. They're not great, but you know, it's fun. I think it's really fun to like throw dough in the air.
Yeah.
Now, I have to ask because this is something I ask every single friend, what
Yeah.
your cooking style is like. Are you someone who cleans as you go, or are you someone who uses like 15 spoons just to, get some, yeah,
I
like you
sense judgment there.
I
'Cause I'm the 15 spoon type.
know.
I use every single pot, every single
Listen, no, it's not just you. My partner is someone who uses like 15 spoons at a time as well, and it always bothers me. But everyone has their own chaos, so I'm just curious. There's no
Oh my
judgment.
gosh, I feel kind of like if I don't say the right answer. No, I actually do clean as I go, and I think maybe that's just kind of growing up in the restaurant life. It would be
Yeah,
mayhem if
yeah,
the chefs didn't clean up.
yeah.
That said, I am the person who really does not follow the recipe.
Oh,
Maybe to a sometimes detrimental degree. Like I should never bake. Like that's just not be a thing because I just
same.
don't measure things, and
Yeah.
I'm like, oh, it says this, I'll just do this instead. And so sometimes that's been amazing. Like like my replacements or substitutions work out really well, and sometimes it's like pretty awful. So I never know, but I just don't like following recipes, and so I really go off of them.
Yeah.
And but mostly because like I don't want to go to the grocery store again. Like if I've got cilantro in my fridge, I'm going to use it instead of parsley.
totally.
Yeah.
But yeah, I do like a clean like station, so to speak. But I've always wanted like a really extravagant like apron or something like that, but I always get splattered all over the place. But and now that I have a dog, he's a healer, and so they're always by you, and so he's always there like while you're cooking, and I'm just like like trying, when you're moving around the kitchen,
Yes.
you always trip over him. I'm like, I'm so sorry, and I'm like, but
Oh.
also go away.
Yeah.
Anyhow, I can tell I know your answers to that question, so
It's obvious, isn't
it's
it?
obvious now. Yeah. Mhm.
That's too funny.
I want to know what your hot pot favorite hot pot ingredient is.
That was the question I was just about to
What?
ask. It's our one consistent question that we ask every single guest at the end of the episode. Well, I can answer that. My favorite's enoki. Tried and true. It's still my favorite. And because I'm vegetarian, so I have limited options. So I tend to go for the mushrooms, shiitake, enoki, just a bunch of exotic mushrooms. David?
What's my favorite? I'm just thinking about what is the first thing that's coming to
Sorry,
mind.
and you know what? I love frozen tofu because it soaks
Oh,
up all the flavor. Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Coagulated pork blood. Is that terrible?
Yes.
And it's so annoying. So TNT, so it's like our version of it's the big Chinese grocery store chain. It got bought out by Loblaws, so they don't
Yeah.
carry it anymore.
Yeah.
So I had well, thankfully I can still get it in Chinatown, and I live just around the corner. But yeah, I don't know why I just crave it all the time, and my partner's always just like, careful, because you're gonna get like iron poisoning or something if you just eat the whole block. Yeah, it's that and rice cakes.
Oh,
yeah,
yum.
rice
So
cakes.
yum. I just love how Jen was like, I'm a vegetarian, and Jen was like,
Coagulated
literally
pork blood.
coagulated pork blood. And I was like, oh
But
my
it's
God.
why we work so well together. It's the
I
balance.
love it. I absolutely love it. That sounds like all those that you mentioned are absolutely delicious. I have a soft spot for like fish balls. Like
Yeah.
they make me so happy for me it's like, okay, taste or whatever, but again, maybe because I'm a poet or whatever, I'm really obsessed with senses mixing, and the moment when it starts boiling and those fish balls kind of do that little roll, they they just kind of
Yeah.
roll, I don't know why, but I'm so delighted by
Yes.
when a fish ball just kind of starts rolling, and it like kind of like it's just like a hamster wheel. Like I'm just like stare. I get like mesmerized by watching a
Yes.
fish ball.
Yeah.
It tastes okay. Actually, to me, it's all about like the fact because it's too hot to eat. Actually, a fish ball just straight. Like
Yeah.
I don't know who does that. Like to just like bite into a gigantic fish ball, you'll burn your mouth. So when you take that spoon and you kind of cut it in half, or you scoop it a little bit. I just
Yes.
really like that kind of, just like
The
that
curvature.
little curvature.
Yeah.
Little's weird.
Yeah.
I don't know why, and I think the hamster wheel thing and the curvature. I just like fish balls
Beautiful.
in that way. But
Love that description.
yeah. Maybe it's ridiculous, but and I love those rice cakes. They're so good. The ones that look like
Chewy.
coins and chewy. Those
Yeah.
are my favorite too. For the texture. I like doing this too. It just feels like
Yeah, I don't know why this does.
yeah, right? It makes a lot of sense.
Yeah.
Oh my gosh, delicious.
We are running out of time.
Yes,
that
it
happen?
always happens, usually.
Yeah.
It goes by so fast.
So fast.
Want to thank you, Jane, so much for joining our Hot Pot Talks this episode. It was such a pleasure to laugh with you, to cry with you, this was such an incredible conversation. So fun and so funny.
Oh my gosh. Thank you, David, and thank you, Jen, so much. It was totally a joy. It's like nighttime has descended upon us.
I know.
Too. I was just like, I made this bowl recently, and it has like a little ghost.
Oh my God.
With a little like, I think it's like a strawberry or something like that. But I was just like, like if I were there, we'd just like, put the soup in here. But just grateful for you both, and just yay, Hot Pot Talks, just amazing series, and it's just been so fun. So, and thanks so much for the support for the Nourish show at the Richmond Art Gallery too. It's I'm still kind of very new to installation art, and it's just been just a space to play. So I just really appreciate all the support. Yeah.
Thank you so much,
Thanks,
Jane.
Bye.
So I guess we can just make one quick announcement. We have another Hot Pot Talks on Sunday at 5 with Jay Caballu. So we'll
It's a
see
last minute edition.
Yes. So we'll see you all on Sunday.
Bye.
See you
Have a
later.
good night.
Bye.